Welcome to Trauma Lens Care, and I am excited to be here with you today. My name is Stacy Gagnon, and I've been invited to do a video series for inmates. I have taught in the jail for several years now, and I will tell you that teaching parents that are incarcerated is actually one of my favorite things to do, mainly because I've learned so much in understanding not just my own children and the things that they're dealing with, but also the world at large. I have 7 children. 5 of my children are adopted, and my husband and I have been foster parents for over 13 years. And so I truly understand the difficulties that many of you are facing on a very personal level. Just a little background about me. I started out as a teacher in a public school system and working with primary education or younger kids. And then I went back to school to get my nursing degree. I ended up specializing in pediatric mental health. But I will tell you that for all of the education that I've received, none of it has prepared me as much as parenting my kids and working with families with kids that we say are from hard places or from hard circumstances. I decided to step into the jail to teach because I recognized that so many of the parents of the children coming through my home were struggling as repeat offenders, or it was a cycle where children were coming into foster care, they would go home, and then they would come back into my home. And in my mind, I always thought, like, oh, please, choose your kids, or please just stop using drugs. I truly believed it was a choice. I truly believed that if they could just have the willpower, that they could just stop and parent. And so I want to share this story at the beginning because I want you to understand my heart, and I want you to understand why I wanted to do this series with you. The very first time I walked into the jail, I had those preconceived notions. I believed drug use was a choice. I believed that you should just stop and please see your kids. And when you walked out of jail, never go back. The first person that I worked with was an inmate, and we'll call her Sarah. Watching Sarah, she's sitting across from me, and she's, has an 8-month pregnant belly, and she's just looks worn out by life. And so as a conversation starter, I said, oh, what's that tattoo on your arm? And she looked me straight in the eye and she told me, that's my mother's name, and that's the day I killed her. The room was just silent. It was quiet, because across from me sat this woman who had already lost 3 of her children into the system to be adopted out, and she did not know where they were. She was in her late 30s and was pregnant with her 4th child and due to be sentenced for a minimum of 15 years. And so if she got out at 15, her boy would be 15. And so I said, what do you mean the day you killed your mother? And that was when she began to tell me a story about drug use in the home when she was a child, and her mother's mental illness, and the stream of men that were in and out of the home, and the abuse and the neglect and all of the hard things that had happened to her before she was even 12. And then how her mother invited her to start using with her, until it culminated into her purchasing a bad batch of meth, giving it to her mother, and going out again to get some drinks and some food, and going back to her mother's and finding her dead on the floor. And I looked at her and I thought, her choice of drug use, or her choice of men and all of the sex and all of the things that she was doing were being used to medicate a deep pain. She would do anything to escape the deep pain that she had experienced as a kid. And that this story, the more time I went into the jail, was repeated over and over and over again as I heard from men who had been neglected and molested and introduced to drugs and alcohol at a young age. And I heard from women who had the same stories, and they were mirroring each other. And that was the point where I recognized that it was, my question was no longer, why the addiction? Why don't you choose your children? What is wrong with you? My questions became, what happened to you? And why the pain? And this video series is to talk to you about the pain and why we are turning to addiction, or we are turning to sex, or we are turning to cutting, or we are turning to things to medicate that pain, and how we can change that for our children, because I know that's what we all want. And in my home, I live with children who struggle with losing their biological parents. And every day, I work hard to help them to recognize that pain of loss so that they can leave my home and function and not turn to external ways to medicate internal pain. And so I'm so glad that you're here with me today. And we're going to talk a lot about hard stuff and maybe some funny stuff, but also some things that you can do right now to help yourself and help your children so that you can see that it is not about just a choice. It's how you can change things to support yourself in a healing process, and by doing that, support your children. So as a nurse, and also as a former teacher, and as a mom of 7 kids, with what I like to say, with 5 baby daddies, and I jokingly say that because 5 of my children are adopted, and so we definitely have a mix and a range of children and abilities and behaviors and all of the things that make life fun and chaotic. I am excited to be here to work with you and talk with you today. I love coming and talking to inmates. I think the hardest part for me doing a video is that I don't get to learn from you. Every time I step in to teach at the jail or in a prison, I take so much away from inmates. And so as we're doing the video, I hope that you learn a little bit about yourselves and about how to be a better parent, grandparent, uncle, all of those things. Today I want to talk to you about a tough subject, but also probably what I believe is one of the most mind-blowing studies that has ever been done. It is called the ACEs study, or the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. As a nurse, I love reading about evidence-based studies and understanding science behind things, especially understanding the science behind the brain and the behaviors that we see in kids. I work a lot with autism and oppositional defiance disorder and reactive attachment disorder and a whole spectrum of things that kids deal with. And so I'm always fascinated to understand what is happening within the brain so that I can better support and help kids. When I read the ACEs study, I was absolutely mind blown over what I believe is something everyone should know. Every single person should understand the ACEs study. In 1985, Dr. Felitti was a physician in an obesity clinic, and he is the one that was the catalyst or started to understand how things that happen in childhood actually affect us across the lifespan. Now, we could all say, absolutely, bad things in childhood could maybe affect us mentally. But what was correlated in this study or found was that things that happened when we were kids actually affects us on the physical health level as well. let's back up and let's look at what happened in 1985. Dr. Felitti was making some really good money helping women in California who were morbidly obese lose an extreme amount of weight. With his programming, he was using counseling, gastric bypass, all of the things that we would think were in an obesity clinic to help women to lose this weight. Well, what happened was that a patient that we will call Jane came into his clinic, and she was just under 500 pounds. Well, in the span of a year, she worked the program and she hit her target weight of 140. So she was considered a success. She was doing great. She was maintaining, and he felt like this is one more successful patient in my clinic. However, in the span of 1 month, Jane gained back exponentially almost 100 pounds. He actually could not believe the amount of weight that she gained. He did not even know that it was physically possible. Well, Jane disappeared at that point for about a year and left the clinic. He kind of wrote it off and moved on. Well, she came back. She had gained almost up to her 450 pounds. And so he sat down and he talked to her and said, "Jane, what happened?" And what he found out from her completely changed his practice, changed what I believe a worldview of adverse childhood experiences or events. Jane had been propositioned by an older gentleman at work to have sex. What Dr. Felitti recognized or heard from Jane was that in her history, she had been molested in her early teens by an older gentleman that was a family member. She was triggered by the proposition at work, and so he recognized and saw that she was using her obesity to protect herself from advances from men. This was then taken further. Dr. Felitti teamed up with the Center for Disease Control and a corporation called Kaiser Permanente. They came up with 10 questions that measure adverse childhood experiences. And so we're going to take a moment and we're going to take these 10 questions. They're yes or no questions. And so these are all events that happened before the age of 18. So you're going to answer yes or no, and then you're going to tally up your yes scores. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about what the results of this study mean and what your score means to you. As a nurse, I hear these statistics, and to me they're staggering. Just to put it in perspective, if I were to tell you if you drink this water that you would be 30% more likely to get cancer, you probably wouldn't want to drink this water. When we start looking at statistics with ACEs and we're talking thousands of %, that's huge. For example, when we get above a 6 on an ACE score, we're 3,000 times more likely to commit suicide. Now, this is not a death sentence or a defining thing for anyone. One of the hardest things when I first walked in the jail and I was giving the ACEs quiz was that the average score for inmates was 7 or higher. And I started asking inmates as well when they started using alcohol or when they started using drugs. And the average age that an inmate started using was 12 and 13. And alcohol and marijuana, the average age was 8 and 9. And so we start to see where painful things cause us to medicate ourselves internally because we want to get away from the painful things. I have an ACE score of 4. That does not mean that I am doomed to have a broken marriage or to become an alcoholic or any of those things. Because the cure for ACEs is relationship or resiliency. Resiliency is how we bounce back from things, and we get that through relationship with people. Now, You as a parent have the opportunity to download resiliency in your children. You have the opportunity to look at the ACEs quiz and recognize the score your children have and what your score is. We know that relationship and environment are what changes the brain. That's how we cure ACEs. Those of you with a high ACE score, I'm hoping that you can think of one person or one relationship in your childhood that downloaded or helped you have resiliency, someone who cared about you. That's the cure for ACEs, is someone that cares about you. ACEs are not your fault. That's something that happened to you. But by recognizing that this is something that happened to me, then I'm able to move on from that. And I'm able to understand that my brain is maybe changed by some of the things that happened to me as a child. As a parent with 4 ACEs, I understand that my reaction to my kids is sometimes changed. This is what I want to talk about as we are doing these videos. I want to talk about how, if you have high ACEs, your perception or how you parent is maybe changed because you have high ACEs. But more than anything, I don't want you to walk away from this and feel hopeless, because you can have high ACEs and you can recognize that it's not that there's something wrong with you, it's that something happened to you.